Hello and welcome to One Week, One Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss a year of film history every episode, starting from 1895, the dawn of cinema. And this week we're talking about 1924. I'm one of your hosts, Cris. I'm a film projectionist, and joining me as always is.
I'm Glen. I'm a filmmaker.
And we are podcasters.
Yep.
Sometimes I gotta finish up that. I feel like it's hanging somewhere.
I feel like that's a good finisher to that little intro.
Speaking of, if you're listening to the podcast, you might want to know that you can watch it on YouTube. You probably already know if you're listening at this point, but you can watch it on YouTube. We'll run the movies for at least the next couple years while it's copyright free. And if you're on YouTube, I would recommend generally watching it on YouTube so you can watch along. But there's a little bonus music in the podcast version that's a little.
If you
exclusive.
wondered where that went from the YouTube versions, it's still in the podcast.
Yeah, still little jokes. Still little jokes.
Yeah.
I think that something that makes sense for this one would be "Send in the Clowns."
It would make a lot of sense. Maybe that's what
you're missing.
Just played. Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what you can do. Those are ways that you can listen to the podcast. What's up, Glenn? How's it going?
It's going. It's a fine week.
This is our first.
It's warm in New York today.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
My birthday was the day before yesterday.
That's right. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
How was it?
It was good. I ate incredibly good sushi.
Oh.
Yeah. It was expensive, but it's worth every penny. It's a place called Sushi Den. And then on the same day, our lease is ending soon, and on the same day, we got our new place figured out. So that's
nice.
exciting, and it's huge.
Awesome.
Which is very very nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all fun. But now that we got this banter kind of stuff over, let's go into our actual show. But first, we're gonna give ourselves a little context for what was happening in 1924. So, Glenn, take it away with the news of the year.
The news of the year, 1924. A new addition to the sports of the world. The first Winter Olympics are held high up in the French Alps. The games include skiing, skating, hockey, curling, and bobsleigh. The Computing Tabulating Recording Company is renamed to International Business Machines, or IBM. In Epcot of Colonial Horrors, the British Empire exhibition opens with relics from all 58 countries under the Empire. Days after signing into law the Asian Exclusion Act, Calvin Coolidge signs the Indian Citizenship Act, exercising racial control over who is and is not an American. 175 days and 74 stops. John Harding and Eric Nelson are the first to circumnavigate the globe in the skies. In Sequoia National Park, the last sighting occurs of the now extinct California grizzly bear. Marcus Lowe merges Metro Pictures, Goldwyn Pictures, and Louis B. Mayer Pictures to become MGM. Box office bomb. After the failure of his film Isn't Life Wonderful, D.W. Griffith is forced to leave United Artists. Father of the Western, Thomas H. Ince, dies mysteriously shortly after meeting with William Randolph Hearst. Rumors abound about his cause of death, including a ruckus and a gunshot aboard Hearst's ship, the Oneida.
Thank you, Glenn.
Some nice industry news in there.
Some industry news. You cut a couple for time. A couple of the bummers for time.
Yeah, those are usually the first ones I cut for time. Because,
yeah.
I mean, some of them also aren't necessarily things like that I feel like immediately give a sense of time. They're just like, oh yeah, awful things were also happening.
Yes. Yeah, there were some awful things happening. Although I'm surprised that you didn't keep the Egan's Rats gang.
It would have been fun. It would have been fun to say, but yeah.
But I'm defeating the purpose of you cutting it for time. So let's get right to the feature presentation.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
This, I think, was the first time we've done this where it really felt like we're up against like too much stuff to cover.
Yeah. I mean, it's felt like that in various ways before, but like we're not doing shorts this week.
Yeah.
And we
And we had to cut like 3 features that
from
we
our
wanted to also watch.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what a tragedy. But we must move on.
Indeed. What do you want to start with?
You know, the last one that I watched was Greed. So let's talk about Greed.
All right. Yeah. I think there's a lot to say about this movie. It's kind of a weird, or it exists in like a weird place, I feel like. Because of the way it's been preserved. Or not preserved.
Yeah, what do you mean?
There's not really any good version of this movie that exists. Because it was initially supposed to be super long. It's an Eric von Stroheim movie, so he was basically making a TV show.
Yeah, he should just be a mini series, basically.
And like, you know, things typically went for Eric von Stroheim. It got seriously cut down by the studio. And that is the only version of it that really properly exists.
Yeah. Originally meant to be 10 hours long. The released version was a little over 2 hours long.
Yeah. And then there's a sort of reconstructed version that uses still frames from the cutscenes and intertitles to kind of fill in all the missing stuff that was cut out.
Yeah, using some info from the shooting script.
Yeah. But it I don't know, I was sort of watching this movie felt like a frustrating experience just because it's like I'm not really watching what it was intended to be seen, but also I feel like even the versions of it that exist now aren't really what people watched in 1924, so it was just like I was just annoyed watching this movie, even though I think it is good. It's just like I feel like I'm sort of watching an approximation of what this movie was more than I'm actually watching the movie.
Well, I mean, the version that still exists, the 2-ish hour one, that is more or less the one that was released, right?
Right, yeah. Although I did my little crazy person edit on it to kind of keep so that most releases of the 2-hour version don't have the stencil colors, which are one of my favorite parts of the movie.
Yeah.
I guess we should say off the top, right? I watched the 4-hour reconstructed version, and you watched.
And I watched the Glen cut.
Right, which is basically the 2-hour one, but with a lot of the intertitles from the 4-hour one, which are taken from the original script. So I made a sort of weird halfway in between one that hopefully is just more watchable.
We can put that up on the second channel.
Yeah, we should. That's a good point.
We'll link it in the description.
So
classic
I know
YouTube words.
I know what all the cutscenes were. Most of them some of them seem pretty much like, yeah, get that out of here. We don't need it. Where some of them I think are pretty intense or striking. I mean, some of them seem like they were maybe cut because of how like lurid or I say lurid on the show a lot. But it's a good word.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely some like just, you know, messed up stuff that happens in this movie that got cut, and I feel like that's probably why they were cut.
I mean, it's pretty intense. So I watched your approximation of the release version, and it is like pretty intense.
It's an intense story. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I can imagine how it would get more extreme, but it was already quite gripping, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's gripping.
Yeah, it was already quite edgy, I should say.
Right. Yeah, it's probably more gripping in a shorter cut, because I feel like the 401 isn't even the fact that it's so long, but it's like whenever it switches over to a scene that's been cut and it's all done through stills, I feel like it just kills the pace.
Right.
And it makes it really like it's a really interesting like academic thing to watch, but
not a good movie.
The experience of actually watching it as a film is very frustrating, I thought.
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
You should watch the Glen cut. It's good.
I should. I haven't watched it all the way through. So, but yeah, I mean, it feels very, having only watched, the only other Von Stroheim movie that I've seen is Foolish Wives.
Me too.
And you can definitely see the authorial voice in this behind both. Like,
yeah, but I like this a lot more than Foolish Wives.
me too.
I
think that's because it's based on a book that he didn't write.
Right. That it's based on a not fake book that he didn't not write. This is yeah, I think that it's a lot tighter than Foolish Wives. Foolish Wives, you can, even though they're both of these movies are about 2.5 hours long, you can tell that there was a lot of stuff cut out of Foolish Wives, and this one actually feels like a coherent movie. That doesn't have characters just randomly dying off screen or something. They probably learned their lesson, and they were like, okay, when we're cutting down a Von Stroheim movie, we need to like make sure that he gets these scenes so that we can get like a shorter cut, basically. But yeah, this movie, it's very dramatic. As a quick synopsis, it is about this guy whose last name is McTeague. People call him Mac. It has a cold open, this movie, which is interesting. It starts with him working as a miner, and there's like a bird on the track, and on the minecart track, and he stops and picks up the bird, and then kisses the bird.
A canary
outside of the coal mine.
Yeah.
And then there's another miner who's like, what's this, a bird? Get out. And he just like swats the bird out of his hand. And then McTeague gets so mad that he throws this guy off a bridge. And that's our first hint into the danger of our main character.
Yeah. Well, it's showing his sort of like his sweetness or his innocence kind of, but then also how he's this like bottled up, like, volcano of like anger and violence potentially also. Yeah.
There's a huckster dentist, fake dentist, who comes into town almost as if like a dentist showman.
Well, like how dentists used to be in the early 1900s.
And his mother says like that's our ticket to wealth, and so she says study under this fake dentist. And then we flash forward to McTeague at his dentist practice, his unlicensed but very official-looking dentist practice in San Francisco years later. And thus begins a love triangle.
Gotta have one of those.
It's a silent movie, you gotta have a love triangle.
Legally required.
This movie reminded me a lot of D.W. Griffith in terms of its, I don't know, edginess. And like it's an edgy love triangle movie that's like trying to be really gritty, there's domestic abuse, and it makes sense because he basically came up under Griffith, von Stroheim. I think that this is handled a bit better, and even though there's a kind of central visual metaphor in this movie of birds and cats, and cats wanting to attack the birds and birds wanting to get out of cages. I think that it's a little clunky, but it works. It's well done.
I think yeah, it definitely feels clunky now, but I think for when this was made, I think a lot of the kind of like visual metaphor stuff was fairly like forward thinking.
For sure. And honestly, like we, in movies today, we don't even do visual metaphors like that, Like there are scenes where so the McTeague and the woman in the love triangle are the two birds in this metaphor.
Trina.
And then the other guy in the love triangle is a cat who is attacking the birds in the cage. And so they'll have like arguments, and then it'll just flash to birds in a cage and a cat like looking at them, just like back and forth, like making this kind of visual connection, which is another like Griffithy thing. Is it's like, let's juxtapose these two things,
Some of them are pretty obvious of just like so McTeague and Trina get married, and then it's like they put the birds into a cage. It's like, oh, they're caged birds now. Like, there's things like that where it's like it's not the most complex visual metaphor, but I at least appreciated kind of the effort of
yeah.
to do something.
I was like, this is great. Like a high school student could get this,
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's very obviously the case. The other man is Trina's cousin. They are to be wed, and then McTeague is like, he's much older, but he's like, I've never talked to a woman before, and I think I'm in love with your cousin. Can you call off your marriage? And he's like, you know what? We're such good buddies that I'll do it.
Yeah, he's like, oh, shucks. Why not? I believe one of his lines is he says, "Ah, rats, I guess you're in love." Or at least that's how, isn't it Mark, right, is the friend.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Or Marcus. They refer to him as Mark in a lot of the intertitles. He sort of acts like he's cool with it, and he is not cool with it. Not one bit. He is very resentful.
Yeah, and then so the McTeague or Mac starts falling in love with Trina as she is doing this like extended 2-week long dental procedure with him.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just chatting while he's in a dental chair, and he's like, "Oh my god, a woman!" And then he puts her under for the first time, and then he kisses her.
Not good dentist decorum.
Later in the movie, he gets his dentist license removed, and there are many reasons why he should get his dentist license revoked, but that's definitely one of them. Yeah, and I was like a little freaked out for a second. I was like, is this movie gonna like treat that as like a romantic, cute thing? I was like
I don't think
afraid
it does.
that was gonna happen. Yeah. It definitely does not. No. Trina seems almost kind of like strong-armed into the entire marriage, and like the second that it happens, she regrets it.
Yeah, she does not seem enthused about it really at any point. But there's like she's like getting pressure from her family. And then McTeague is also just this like huge dude who is like very pushy about it. And it's like they established like they get along okay, but it's like you get the sense McTeague doesn't really it's like this is the only woman that he's ever talked to. And Trina is kind of like too shy almost to even say anything in response to that. So they get married. The thing during the marriage scene, which another bit of visual metaphor that I quite liked, is there is a funeral happening outside the window while they're getting married.
In the this isn't canonical to the movie or whatever, but in the DVD that I sourced the audio from, it was like the wedding music, right, during the wedding, and then when the funeral starts happening in the background, you hear the funeral dirge, and then the music mixes together between the two of them.
Oh,
so
cool.
That was pretty good.
Yeah. And then right around the same time that they get married, Trina also wins the lottery. She wins $5,000, which I mean in 1900s money. I mean now chunk of change. In 1900s money, that it's like a lot of money.
A chunk of change.
Yeah. Several chunks, even. They move in together. They're sort of trying to make married life work.
A lot of kind of stuff gradually happens over the course of their marriage that makes McTeague become less of a pushy teddy bear and more outwardly threatening. And a lot of it revolves around the $5,000 that Trina has decided that they will just like keep safe, and they'll just work and have the $5,000 as a backup for life stuff. And he's always trying to get into the $5,000, and she's keeps pushing him back.
Yeah, There is a bit right before, so there's sort of a time jump right after the marriage that we jump ahead to like years later into their lives. Right before that, there was a scene I just want to point out because I thought it was really, really effective use of intertitles, and that a lot of all the dialogue is intertitles, but it's generally, if you see people talking on screen, there will be an intertitle saying what they say. And there's a bit
lot
right
of
at
dialogue.
Yeah, right. There's a bit right after the marriage where Trina has this sort of very kind of frightened, pleading conversation with her mother, sort of. But it never goes to an intertitle. We never actually, hear in quotes what she's saying to her mother. But we can get the sense just through the performance that she doesn't have the best vibes about this marriage going forward.
Right.
And I thought that was just it felt very deliberate, and it was like it made that scene much kind of scarier, just because of like, if there had been some flowery old timey intertitle of like, "But mother, I'm so frightened about McTeague," it wouldn't have the same effect of just the actors conversing and we see their eyes and their expressions, and that's
it's like the
really
Jaws shark.
Exactly. Is it?
because you're what you're imagining is worse than it could ever be.
Right. And then that scene ends on this nice sort of shot of Trina in her wedding dress looking kind of ghostly, and McTeague closes a curtain covering the camera.
Right. There's an intermission there, I believe, right?
There is, although that I think on both versions of it that I like, on both like released versions, it skips over that, but there's like a couple frames where it says intermission. It like starts to fade in and then cuts, and just the next scene happens. I'm like, oh, so that's supposed to be an act break, like an intermission right there.
Huh.
So on mine, I put the intermission thing back in, because I'm like, clearly that was the intent. Then we flash forward 3 years ahead, and Trina is not wanting to spend any of her winnings, and McTeague keeps being like, let's buy a house, let's do this, let's spend it.
It's burning a hole in my pocket.
Yeah, and that's sort of for this whole kind of like second act of the movie, that sort of the main conflict is sort of Trina being sort of withholding with her money, and sort of we see a kind of descent of McTeague from being this sort of more sort of upstanding, sort of shy guy into a more angry, demanding, abusive drunkard, basically.
Yeah, and another thing that kind of factored into the love triangle angle of the movie is that Marcus realized that, like, wait a second, I called off my marriage with my cousin, and then months later, just a couple months later, she wins $5,000. Like, that $5,000 should be mine. You don't deserve it.
He feels entitled to that, even though it was never his. Like, yeah. We also never get the sense that I feel like Trina wanted to marry Marcus either.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was I in my notes I wrote a love triangle where they're both scumbags.
Yeah.
Usually it's like one good guy and one bad guy, but this is a whoever wins we lose situation.
Whoever wins, Trina loses.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have not seen Alien vs. Predator, but I reference that tagline often.
I mean, it's a very good tagline. Tagline is really much better than the film. So
after a while, Marcus kind of exits the picture because he kind of, I guess, realizes that he's been defeated, basically. He kind of pettily tries to get money out of Mac, and at one point they even start like a bar brawl, but eventually he just realizes, like, you know what, I'm just gonna go. Like, there's nothing good for me here. I'm gonna go be a cowboy.
As you do.
And then couple weeks later, Mac gets a letter that says, "Hey, by the way, we found out that we're the dentist organization. We found out that you're not a real dentist and you have a dentist practice. Stop." um, and then that's where everything like really goes downhill, and
Right.
they become poor. They have to get these kind of rough jobs, and Mac gets into drinking and being more violent, and everything just gets bad.
Yeah. Gets real bad to the point where what's like the first real bad thing to happen? I mean, I guess it is sort of just like they're bickering more and more. Sort of Trina is becoming more and more withholding of she has kept on the $5,000 this whole time. They've moved into like this shack. Mac isn't working. He's just this layabout. He keeps asking her for money, for booze. And eventually Mac he goes fishing one day and doesn't come back. And then Trina gets a job at a school, washing the floors. She finally withdraws her $5,000 from the bank and puts it in her bed so she can lie in it. It's all in gold coins. Mac comes back to get the money from her, and she still refuses, and he ends up in a very like well shot and upsetting scene.
Yeah.
Ends up murdering her. Kind of chases her into a room, and you can tell that there's like violence happening, but doesn't really show any of it. There's some stuff that gets cut out here. I guess there was a cut scene. I want to wait till the end to describe what most of the scenes that were cut out were. But there's the scene that it takes place at night. He shows up at school at night, and there's this really moody lighting. It happens on Christmas Eve, so there's like Christmas decorations, which is a really cool detail. Mac kills her and takes the money. There is a scene that was cut that is only in stills, that the next morning the children go to the school and find Trina's like bloody corpse on the floor.
Oh jeez.
And it does seem like it's like, yeah, I see why they cut this out in the 20s. Like, this is a very very macabre scene. There's a lot of blood in this movie in general, much more so than I think I associate with movies of this era. Like,
yeah, particularly in the stencil colors.
Yeah.
There, after he kills her, there begins this. Marcus finds it, like, sees his face on a wanted poster, and there begins this kind of western-y sequence where they're like chasing after Mac on like through Death Valley. And he gets a posse. He ends up just going on after him by himself.
The posse turns around. They're like, we can't keep going through Death Valley. Like, this is madness.
And eventually, after tracking him for a while, he catches up with Mac. There's some kind of gun pointing, and eventually the mule that's holding the $5,000 runs away. So they shoot the mule. The coins spill out. The last of the water that's remaining, and they're in the middle of the desert, spills out onto the ground.
Well, when they shoot the mule, the bullet goes through the canteen also and spills all the water. So it's like the gunshot also gets rid of their water supply.
All because the mule dies and all the coins spill out. There are just coins with like blood all over
on
them.
Blood money,
which is like very like, here's the theme, everybody.
Again, not the most subtle visual metaphor, but again, like,
it's good.
It's a cliche because it works.
They have a bad time in the desert.
Yes, they do. They fight over the money. Mac beats Marcus to death, as he tends to do to people. But during the fight, he finds out he's been handcuffed to him.
Oh, that was a great reveal.
Incredible.
It was so good in that movie. It's like, you're like, oh my god, like he killed him, and then he just looks down and he's like handcuffed to a dead body in the middle of a desert with no water.
And then
that's great.
the last thing that he does before he presumably starves to death or dehydrates is he frees the canary that he's kept in his cage this whole time. And the canary flies free, like in Blade Runner. It's great. I think we should talk about the stencil colors for a sec, because that was one of my favorite things about this movie.
Sure.
So typically when we've seen stencil colors and things, it's like really bright, sort of not super realistic coloration of things. I'm thinking of like the Segundo de Chimon films with like a pink ghost and a green giant and like a purple castle, and like they're really bright, colorful things.
I mean, some of the later Pathé color looked pretty naturalistic, but
Yeah.
a lot of the early stencil color definitely.
But they're used just to sort of brighten up the image and just give it some visual flair. Whereas this, only 2 colors are ever used: red for blood and gold for gold.
Yes.
And so there's a bunch of, so like when the dentist comes into town at the very beginning, he's got this big gold tooth on his wagon, and that is actually gold.
It's very Django.
It is, yeah. There's a bit when Trina reveals her like the dental work that she's gotten done. She like pulls her lip back, and you see the gold teeth. Sort of everything else is in black and white, and there's just this gold like in the center of the frame. There are a couple sort of very kind of surreal like cutaways to like hands rubbing gold coins, kind of these like weird, like malnourished, spooky hands.
Some metaphor hands.
Kind of like picking up gold coins and stuff. And it's, just the coins are gold. Everything else is black and white. And just the selectiveness of when the stencil color is used, I think, is really, really effective and really cool. Like, it reminds me of later movies from like the 90s or later that are in black and white but have these
sounds
selective...
like Spielberg's cribbing a little bit from the silent era.
maybe. But yeah, it is that like Schindler's List or Sin City thing where it's like black and white with like very selective color in it.
Yeah. It's well done.
And yeah, I hadn't seen that with stencil colors like this before.
I know next year, I believe, Battleship Potemkin uses some like one, if I remember correctly, one very specific use of red.
Interesting.
In that movie.
I think I've only ever seen black and white versions of it. So,
we'll find out.
Indeed. So the main things that were cut out of this movie to make it shorter was, originally there were a couple of pretty significant subplots involving the other people who lived like in the apartment building as McTeague. There was one involving these two old people, a man and woman, who like had apartments next to each other, and that they found out that it used to be one apartment that had been like sectioned off with a wall. And so because that was like a more recent wall that was put in, they could hear everything the other person did, and so they became like really accustomed to like their comings and goings, and like knew exactly where like they put their hat and like where they cooked dinner, and like they like got to know each other just through proximity of like living next to this thin wall that separated their two apartments. And they end up falling in love and removing the wall to make their apartment one.
Huh.
And they kind of like it. They do interact with the other characters, but it's sort of like it will occasionally kind of like cut away to scenes of them. There's a lot more scenes with like Trina's family throughout the whole thing. So Marcus ends up being, if you watch the longer one, Marcus is the reason why Trina needed dental work to begin with, because he was like pushing her on a swing and it broke and she fell and like knocked her teeth out.
Oh wow.
And then with the other like big subplot is there's also these two there's another couple. There's that like sweet romantic story of the couple who falls in love. And then there's this other couple. There's like this junk collector guy, and there's a woman named Maria. And Maria is the person who sells the lottery ticket to Trina. And they're both sort of like down in their luck, impoverished, don't have a lot, Maria keeps saying how she came from great wealth, like her family used to have all this money, but it was lost somehow. And kind of just through like convenience, Maria and Zerkow, as the junk collector, end up getting married and have a child that's described like the baby from Eraserhead. It's described as a wretched, sickly child that dies after a few weeks.
Oh my god.
It just, similarly to everything else that happens in the movie, things get worse and worse and worse. Zerkow thinks that Maria is like hiding money from him. He eventually murders her and then drowns in the bay, holding a bunch of rusty dishes, because he was under the impression that she had buried all these gold dishes somewhere. And so I guess he like dug up a bunch of rusty dishes, thinking that was what they were, and jumped into the bay and drowned. Trina then has a nightmare about Maria, which even in stills is like really freaky and scary, because Maria was killed by having her throat cut, and so she shows up with this like scar across her throat. And she's like chasing after Trina in the dream. Another like really sort of like upsetting, intense thing that gets cut out is there's a bit where Mac and Trina are fighting, and Mac bites her fingers, which that is in the shorter cut. But then later on, there's a cut scene where her fingers get infected and she has to get them amputated. And it's
wow.
like, I think it's hard to tell with the stills, because it's like they were added in later and they were brought back, but it's like, at least in the stills, in the reconstructed version of it, there's possibly some sensible coloring of like her sort of like discolored, like purple infected fingers, and it's like,
Jeez.
oh. And then there's a bunch more of sort of like in the third act of like McTeague sort of escape into Death Valley, and like why he's going to Death Valley in the first place, and sort of like it's not as much of a kind of jump to just, oh, he's on the run. Mm-hmm. Like he goes back to his old mining town, and like tries to get a job there again. It doesn't work out, and he has to escape, and there's a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, quite the picture.
I appreciate how movies of this time, compared to movies now, are like less afraid to have like the main character be like a bad guy, you know?
Yeah.
Like there are other things that kind of like, I don't know, people have anti-heroes now, but like this is just like a guy who sucks. And
McTeague is not an anti-hero. He's just an awful dude.
Yeah. Which I think is interesting. You know, we saw that in Phantom Carriage a bit too, even though it was a bit of a Scroogey kind of situation. Yeah, I like how, you know, the kind of formulaic kind of hero villain plot stuff is not like fully established in a way, and so we can get some more interesting like character studies. Yeah. Maybe more adult character studies.
The version of I watched the 4-hour cut online, so it had a sort of unauthorized score that was mostly taken from There Will Be Blood, which seems like an appropriate score to pull from. One, because it's just a good score, but it did remind me of that movie a bit, just in terms of like it's sort of like messed up American Dream kind of plot. And also it's sort of like, yeah, it's following a main character who is just bad, like not a good guy.
Right. And they both have Paul F. Tompkins in them.
Correct.
Do you have anything else on Greed?
Just a pretty quick like behind the scenes stuff. It was made by Goldwyn Pictures sort of during, like before and during the merger into MGM. It was shot on location in Death Valley in the summer, and a bunch of crew did have to get sent back to LA because of heat exhaustion. And the sort of first cut of it was only screened once for about 12 people, and it was, as far as I can tell, this information is a little sketchy, but it was 42 reels, which is like between 8 and 10 hours. Um, and I think von Stroheim was able to cut it down to around 24 reels, at which point he refused to cut any more out of it. There's a quote I found from him where it said, "It would leave gaps that could only be bridged through titles. When you do such a thing, you have illustrated subtitles instead of a motion picture."
Fair enough.
And then it was, they got other editors to come in and, cut more out of it. And von Stroheim was very upset and kind of disowned the theatrical version of it.
I mean, we've only seen really cut down, mangled versions of von Stroheim movies, but he does seem like a guy who uses a lot of intertitles.
He does seem like a guy who uses a lot of intertitles. He also seems like a guy that maybe could use some edits. Like, I think both these movies feel like too much was cut out of them, but at the same time, it feels like there could be a happy medium that, maybe make like a 3.5 hour movie that functions.
Yeah, I think it works as a short version.
I do too. Yeah.
Greed was a very real world drama movie, very human level, very muted. It's dramatic, but it's like real stuff. It's muted.
Yeah.
It's complex acting. There's another movie that has people who have neck scars, that has some pretty extreme dramatic acting in it, and that is The Hands of Orlac.
Yeah, a movie I was very excited to see, and I kind of was let down by a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
I don't think this was as good as I hoped it would be, but
this is Robert Vina, who did Caligari, teaming back up again with
Conrad Veidt, who played the somnambulist.
And he somnambulates a little bit more in this movie,
He
too.
does, yeah. He does a lot of stuff in this movie. I do like Conrad Veidt in this movie, even if he is going real big.
Yeah, I was watching this movie, and at the beginning, when I was seeing all of this like big acting from Conrad Veidt, I was like, he is doing some good stuff with his face. He is like really selling this drama, and then he kept just like posing with his hands in the air and wild gestures on his face, like, and then a different pose and then a different one, and then I'm just like, okay, there's silent movie acting, and then there is this, which is like way overacting.
This I do feel like is like what people think of when they think of silent movie acting, of just like super exaggerated like body movement and that sort of thing. I did write down, I think Conrad Veidt's eyeballs are the real star of this movie. This movie has a great premise.
It's super pulpy and super fun.
Yeah. The premise of this movie is Paul Orlac is a famous pianist, great piano player, but he gets in a train crash.
The train crash is done super well.
Great. It lasts a little too long, but it is pretty great. There's some cool like text on screen in this part where people are like, "There's been a crash in whatever the town is," and it's, instead of being done in intertitles, it's done in sort of animated text on screen, which is something Robert Vina did a little bit in Caligari also, which I like. I'm a fan of that.
Right.
But so then they find Orlac and his hands. They say the hands they're ruined. His beautiful piano playing hands.
And his wife is like they're operating on him, and it's like, it's not worth saving his life unless you can save his hands.
Yeah, pretty much. And the doctor's like, interesting. Methinks I have an idea. And he's looking out the window at a serial killer who's being executed like at the same time. And he kind of looks out the window and is like, a pair of hands maybe. And so then Orlac wakes up and is, he's sort of convalescing. He's getting better. And they reveal that his hands have been transplanted from this murderer.
Yeah.
And Well, he gets it. He finds out because someone leaves a note like in his bed saying like, "Hey, you have murder hands now." And he tries to play the piano. He can't play the piano anymore. But he keeps sort of like, he like finds a knife in his house. He's sort of haunted by the knowledge that he has murder hands. And more he thinks that he's going insane, and that the hands might be sort of like taking control of him and making him commit murders. His father, who hates him, ends up being murdered. And there's like, oh, the killer Vasur, his fingerprints were on the knife at the scene, and he's like, no, these hands, they've done a murder. And then we find out that he did have the murderer's hands the whole time, but all of the actual murder stuff and him finding the knife and all the sort of like ghostly apparitions that he's been seeing are all because of this con artist who knew the killer and is basically just trying to extort money from him.
It's very Scooby-Doo.
It kind of is, yeah.
It's Scooby-Doo mixed with the kind of like similar gimmicky twist of Caligari, which maybe is just a Vina thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think this movie's a lot less visually inventive than Caligari. It's not nearly it's not nearly as impressionistic.
This is placed in the German Expressionism camp, and with the lighting and some of the set design, I can see it, but like
the set design especially is a little impressionistic, but not super crazy.
I think like as far as Expressionism goes, like, crazy set design, it's like Caligari all the way up here, then like 4 notches down is the golem, and then like 10 notches below is everything else.
Yeah. I didn't mind the sort of like con artist twist that it's like he actually hasn't been murdering anyone with his murder hands.
Yeah.
But I wish that the reveal had gone even further and been like, oh, he's had his own hands this whole time, and all of his sort of weird that I can't control what my hands are doing is all in his head, which I guess it is, but it's like because you find out he also had a head injury. I wish they'd push it even further, where it's like he never even had a hand transplant.
And yeah, you just went over. We spent a very long time going over Greed, which is about 40 minutes longer than this. But you just went over the entire movie, and this movie is an hour and 50 minutes, and it eats through a lot of that time with just Conrad Veidt just
looking at his hands,
mugging. Yeah,
which I mean is good. It's good, but it is there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some cool stuff with the con artist who's pretending to be the murderer and his sort of like cloak. He's pretending to be the murderer who had his hands amputated, so he's got these like fake prosthetic hands, which turn out to just be like gloves that he made. But I like that. That was like a cool thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool spooky stuff in this movie. Him encountering like this apparition of the murderer is very cool. I don't want to be too down on this movie because I think it's neat. It's just too long, it has like a lot of. I think even though the set design is not necessarily full Caligari, I think there's still some like really nice compositions in this movie. It's cool to look at, This can definitely go on that honorary list of like silent movies to put on in the background during a party.
Very true. We should make a playlist of those.
Yeah.
It is also worth, I think, noting that the plot of this movie, I think, directly influenced or inspired Doctor Strange's origin, and also the Fry gets his hand swapped with the robot devil episode of Futurama.
This movie was also remade in the 30s with Peter Lorre in a sound version.
I gotta see that.
Yeah. I think it's also like a lot shorter, so
yeah,
that'll be good.
There's also that Simpsons episode where Homer gets the hair transplant and that seeps into his brain.
This has got to all be that, yeah. I mean, it's a cool idea. It's a fun idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I think I like the idea that it's a twist, but I also like an idea that it's not a twist, and that like literally just your hands can make you kill people if you have killer hands. I think that's fun.
It is.
even
It's
if it
very
doesn't make
fun.
any sense.
Yeah. I do love it. Another movie with a lot of surreality
Uh-huh.
and some wild stuff
Mm-hmm.
is Thief of Baghdad.
Oh. Oh, yeah. Oh.
Thief of Baghdad. What a picture.
This movie slaps so hard.
Oh, yes, it does. This movie rules. This movie is so goddamn fun.
If I had to show somebody like a non like slapstick silent movie and just go like, watch this, you're gonna have fun.
Yeah.
Thief of Baghdad, like no question. This movie is so good.
Yeah. So this is a Douglas Fairbanks joint. I feel like he didn't direct it, but he feels like kind of the main auteur of it.
Yeah.
Much like Mark of Zorro. He did a couple other... Mark of Zorro was his first sort of like swashbuckling movie. He did a couple in the years between. He did like a Robin Hood, Don Juan or whatever, Don Q, and then Thief of Baghdad, which is probably the most famous one. I don't know. Mark of Zorro is pretty famous too.
Yeah, probably Mark of Zorro.
But I'd heard of this movie for sure. Never seen it. Douglas Fairbanks plays a sort of Aladdin type, I guess. He likes showing off his abs.
I don't think he wears a shirt at any point in this movie.
He briefly does when he's pretending to be the prince, but that's I think
right,
the only part. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like I hopped into the middle of the movie for a second before I started it, and my partner looked at it and was like, I didn't know that people from this long ago were that cut, you know?
Weirdly enough, me neither. Because Douglas Fairbanks basically never wears a shirt in this movie, and it's like, yeah, good abs.
He's showing off the goods. I mean, which is interesting because like, I was like, he's like a little chubby in Mark of Zorro.
Yeah.
And then like he's just like ripped.
He's in full heartthrob mode in this movie for sure.
Yeah.
With his 20s mustache. It is, I think, come out right at the top and say it. Douglas Fairbanks, not the most accurate depiction of a Middle Eastern person. I think this movie definitely has you have to watch it in the context of 1924. This is not trying to be a remotely accurate depiction of, ancient Iraq. This movie deals in some pretty heavy duty cultural, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Appropriation.
Yes, there we go. Cultural appropriation all over this movie.
I guess. I mean, I don't want to make excuses for this, but like we were doing this up until like 25 years ago.
I know. There was a movie from 2008 called Prince of Persia, starring Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah.
So
it's like
it's.
I'm not saying
it's not saying that it's better now, but yeah.
We can look at this stuff critically, but like honestly, like I don't know, like I think that like there's nothing like hateful about this movie.
No,
like again, like there are issues with it in and of itself, but like this is not like watching Birth of a Nation with the blackface in it.
No.
This is just like I'm a white guy who is playing Aladdin.
Yeah.
So I wear bronzer,
I only bring it up because I think it's my only negative thing I can say about this movie.
Fair enough.
Pretty much everything else about it, I'm just like, nope, rules, awesome, great, the best.
Yeah, we'll get that out of the way.
Right off the bat, there is a lot of this isn't necessarily a knock against the movie, but there's a lot of like people saying "thou" in this movie, much like in Toll of the Sea, and I'm like, no Iraqi person has ever said "thou."
There's a lot of like faux biblical speak in this movie.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like we're introduced to Douglas Fairbanks as what's the character's name?
Does he have a name?
I just call him Doug in my head. He does have a name, yes. Ahmed.
Oh, there you go.
So Ahmed is like I said, an Aladdin type. He's a street rat. He's literally
Aladdin.
he's a thief. He's stealing bread. He's using a pineapple for a grappling hook. He's eating.
Oh my god.
He's eating rice off of a balcony like it's an apple pie.
See, this is how much amazing stuff happens in this movie that, like, you can just say he uses a pineapple as a grappling hook and then just move right on by.
right along. He hides in a bunch of big pots. His sort of mantra at the beginning is, what I want, I take. And
he's the thief of Baghdad.
Yeah, the titular thief. And he shows up to a mosque, and they're like, hey, maybe try giving religion a chance. And he's like, no, ha 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 ha, I steal, that's what I do. And he laughs in their face and he runs away.
I will say, like, all this like the stealing, like even like all the scenes where he's like lifting stuff off of people, it's all like so fun and like funny, and like I think
charming
that this movie, like this movie shares what I thought was really great about Mark of Zorro, which is that, like, somehow, like, Douglas Fairbanks just like leaps off the screen as the most like affable, charming person in the universe, and you cannot like help but just like have a dumb grin anytime he's on the screen.
Right, his dumb grin is infectious.
Yes.
It just there's definitely just a real sense of joy that he brings to his characters that is hard to not get swept up in. And so we find out that there's a princess,
Jasmine.
I don't think that's actually her name, but yeah, basically. And there's all these suitors, right, who are coming to try to marry her. And we find out that there is the Mongol prince has his eyes set on Baghdad. He wants to take over the city. And so he's one of the suitors coming in. And then so there's this parade of suitors that comes into the palace, right? And the princess is like, gross, 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 gross to each of them. And then Douglas Fairbanks disguises himself as a prince so he can come in also. And he's like, hello. One of these suitors has good abs.
Yeah. I guess the other negative thing you can say about this movie is that, like, he comes in with the intention to like chloroform and kidnap the princess, which is not a
nice
great thing
look
to do.
No,
yeah.
No, it's not.
And then he goes like, oh no, I love her, I can't drug her and take her away, you know?
Like, immediately he's like, this is a terrible idea, like, she's actually super nice, like, I'm not gonna kidnap her.
But yeah, it is like the whole, like, Aladdin, Prince Ali.
It is literally the Prince Ali musical number from Aladdin happens in this movie, minus the song.
So I don't know enough about the non-Aladdin parts of 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights, to know like if the back half of the movie is also like inspired by that stuff. It's definitely like an Arabian Nights pastiche.
Yeah.
Like, it is taking the Aladdin story and just like remixing it just a little bit, and whether or not the back half of the movie has stuff from it or not, it's like appending more onto it afterward. So the first half is this like very swashbuckly, Fairbanksy Aladdin pastiche. The second half of the movie is like a proto like Harryhausen adventure movie, by way of like a like more narratively souped up Georges Méliès, and
so good.
And
so
also
good.
Like a little bit of like Princess Kaguya like put in there.
Yeah,
too.
it's like a treasure hunt. It's also like we'll get to it. I mean,
yeah.
It's worth mentioning one of the princess's handmaidens is played by Anna May Wong.
Yes.
And she's like a double agent. She's working for the Mongolian prince. There are 3 princes, right? There's the Mongolian prince, the like real evil one. There is the Prince of the Andes, and
He's the medium evil one.
Yeah.
and then there's the one that she's just like, oh, he's fat.
Yeah, that one is
the Prince of Persia.
Prince of Persia, correct. So there's Anna May Wong as the handmaiden has sort of set up this this ruse, right, where she's told the princess this prophecy that whatever suitor touches the rose tree in the garden is the one that she will marry. And so she's like, "Hey, Mongolian prince, make sure you touch the rose tree in the garden." But then before he can do that, a bee flies out, and he's like swatting away the bee, and the bee flies over to Douglas Fairbanks's horse, and the horse kicks him off, and he flies into the tree, and the princess is like, "Oh, I guess I'm gonna marry him." Yeah, incredible. Right, they have one of the, like, I guess security measures for the palace is they have this big ape played by an actual chimpanzee. And at one point they say fling. So yeah, Douglas Fairbanks is he like professes his love to the princess, but he gets caught in his con, and chased. They catch him, and they're gonna put him into the flogging pit, and they say fling him to the ape, which is a great phrase when you capture someone. But the princess smuggles him out through the secret panel to the streets. Great that there's a secret panel. And so she's trying to delay the marriage. She's like, "Hey, I don't want to get married yet. All the suitors have to go off for a week and seek out treasure to bring back to me, and I'll pick whichever one brings back the coolest treasure."
Yeah. And so that's when like the kind of second half of the movie kicks in. And so she is doing this like specifically like I don't know if they knew about this like legend when they were, or if this is just a thing outside of that, but like it is doing this like Princess Kaguya thing of like, I've got these suitors, but I don't want them, so I'm going to send them on ridiculous quests to get them out of my face, basically.
Yeah. So all four princes, including the fake prince of Baghdad, Thief of Baghdad, go off to their different different treasure hunts, and all of these treasure hunts are the coolest and the best, and I love them. So the first one is, well, so the Douglas Fairbanks has like a couple different things he has to get through. He has to go through the Valley of Fire. Great. Valley of Monsters. He fights an alligator dragon, played by an alligator in like a Halloween mask. It's so good.
I like you watched this one before I did, and when that scene happened, I was like, "Oh, this is why Glenn likes it so much."
Oh my god! I mean, I would have liked it anyway, but yeah, that pushes it over the edge. So Valley of Monsters, he like sword fights this alligator dragon thing, and there's great like it's
so
just
cool.
It's a great 20s effect of like either multiple exposure, whatever, however they did it, of like massive looking alligator dragon, and then Douglas Fairbanks is tiny in the frame, and he's like waving a sword around, and then they cut in close to like a fake dragon belly that he gets to stick a sword into and like cut a big hole in.
Yeah, it does. So this movie does so much with suggesting scale and suggesting like effects, like by choosing shots very carefully. It has some like close-ups of like a real size like alligator creature, like a human, something that would be way too small to be a giant creature, but it like has it really close, so it like in context it looks really big. Then it shows like the belly zoomed in, that's a completely different thing, and then it introduces the shot with him in like a double exposure, really really tiny on the bottom left side of the frame, and then like the dragon taking up like a huge part of the right side of the frame. So it's like establishing the space, and then like once it's establishing like the space and the scale and everything like that, then it can like do all of these kind of quick cuts to different angles, and it all feels of a piece. It works really well, and that's not like the only great effect. There's so many good effects in this movie.
We can't list all the good effects. There's too many, or all the great like all the sets in this movie are mind-boggling.
Huge sets, like there are effects in this movie where I was like, I don't know how they did that.
Yeah.
Which is maybe the first time that has happened for us.
Yeah, I mean, just there's the sheer amount of effects and tricks and things that are happening throughout this whole thing is crazy. So after he fights the alligator dragon, he goes to the Cavern of Enchanted Trees and talks to a tree guy, which is amazing. And just the coolest costume of this, like, tree that comes alive, and it's this tree guy. He's got, like, long, like, you know, branch fingers and stuff. The coolest.
Yeah, he's like frozen, like, as a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of like fades to him like waking up and being able to move around, but he moves around in a very Doug Jonesy way,
So good.
Guy in a big costume.
He gets a treasure map from the tree guy. He fights a big bat creature. And then he goes to what's it? The Old Man of the Midnight Sea, which is the underwater level, where he dives down into the ocean and fights a sea spider. Which, again, such an amazing creature. Just this, and it's funny because it's like he's swimming down to this thing. It's, you know, Douglas Fairbanks just acting like he's underwater, and it's slightly overcranked, so it's a little bit slow motion.
Yeah.
And then this really creepy spider thing just starts floating down towards him, and I'm like, no, turn around. There's a spider behind you.
And yeah, he sells being underwater really well. There's this like really tall shot where he's swimming down, and he must have been like on a wire or something like that. And so they're like, overcranking it, and so he's moving a bit slower, pretending to swim down, and it's like this really wide shot. So and like with all these filters over it and everything, so it really looks like he's underwater. I kind of thought that they might have just built like a giant underwater set because like they could have, you know.
And so he
gets tempted by some sirens.
He kills the sea spider when there's a bunch of mermaids down there, and he's like, I could just stay here with all these mermaids, but no, I have a princess to go marry. So then he goes off to the abode of the winged horse, where he gets a Pegasus to ride and a magic little chest. That's his treasure, right? It's his magic chest. Meanwhile,
he can pull he discovers that he can just kind of wish for something, and then he pulls it out of the chest and it just appears.
Meanwhile,
so that's his great treasure.
We have our three villain princes, right? Our like actual villain, our two sort of like sub villain princes, and they each have a cool adventure they go on. Yeah,
and it's kind of like intercutting between like between Ahmed and like the other princes, like doing their quests.
So the Mongolian prince goes to the islands of Wak, W-A-K, and I saw that come up. I'm like, oh, I love this, and it's a whole set that they built just for that, presumably, of like his boat coming in. There's an amazing reveal where we see like the sail of the boat is lowered and reveals the set like behind it as the boat is kind of coming into the port.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Incredible. It's so cool.
Nice.
And then there's like literal stuff from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom of like a circle door that like rolls out of the way, and he goes and he finds a magic apple that can bring people back from the dead or like heal someone even if they've died. And he tests this by using a staff with a living snake in it, to bite a guy at
just
the
a
port,
random guy,
to kill him, and then he uses the thing to bring him back just to prove that it works. And he's like, "This is a great treasure."
The Mongol prince, by the way, like he, she sends them all out. They're all like earnestly trying to get the best gift, the most rare treasure that they can. But the Mongol prince is also like, I got a backup plan here. Like, I'm going to send many, many people into the city pretending to be porters, but they're actually soldiers. And we're going to prepare to take over the city because I want this city no matter what.
He also is having people spy on the other villain princes to see what treasures they're getting.
Looking over their shoulders, like, what do you got?
Yeah, pretty much. So the Prince of Persia just buys a flying carpet, like at a market. And the Prince of the Indies has a guy climb a giant statue and steal a crystal ball from the eye. And the guy falls and dies, but then the prince is like, cool, it's mine now.
Yeah, that's why I think he earns like secondary villain, because like, you know, the Prince of Persia didn't really do anything wrong. Like this guy is like a piece of shit.
Exactly.
And it's like a huge statue. This is another thing
Yeah.
where they're really playing with scale and like selling this giant thing. Like they have this probably like a miniature that is like this huge, maybe Vishnu or something like that. It's like a multi-armed god statue, and then they like cut in on him like climbing up some like huge parts of it that are like zoomed in, and so you're getting the sense of him like climbing up this giant thing. It works so well.
Reminded me a lot of Uncharted 2. I was like, this is literally a thing that happens in Uncharted 2, like climbing up a big statue thing. Another thing that Ahmed does that I forgot to mention is he also goes to the Citadel of the Moon, where he gets an invisibility cloak because he needs one of those. Anime Wong uses knockout incense on the princess and poisons her
to set the stage for the kind of amazing rescue from the Mongol prince.
And so they see that she's dying on the crystal ball, and so they all pile onto the flying carpet to fly back to the palace.
And the flying carpet effects. Oh my god. Oh my god.
Maybe the best effect in the whole movie.
Yeah. Like at first, there's like a magic rope that he uses, and I'm like, oh my god, that's a really cool effect.
We didn't even mention
way back
the magic
in the beginning
rope
of the movie.
Yeah.
He uses a magic rope to like scale walls. He just throws it up in the air and then climbs up the rope as it hangs in the air. So cool. Blew my mind. And then like when I saw this magic carpet take off, my jaw was on the floor.
Yeah.
It was
it's
so good.
So they all fly back to Baghdad. The Mongol prince uses his magic apple to heal the princess. And then all the villains argue over who has the coolest magic item at that point. They were like, no, mine's coolest. And the princess is like, all of these would be useless if it weren't for the other two. Because, like, you never could have healed me with the apple if you didn't know I was dying, and you couldn't fly here. You couldn't fly here if you didn't know, So it's like...
She's mainly stalling to let Doug come back.
So then the Mongol prince is like, all right, activate secret, soldier initiative. And all the Mongol
Order 66.
Yeah, pretty much. And so all the Mongol soldiers like throw off their like, peasant robes and bring out their swords and shit and swarm the city at night and take over.
Yeah. Now, obviously, they're going to lose in the end, right? The hero's going to defeat them.
Sure.
In actual history, though, the Mongols did successfully take over Baghdad.
Well, for how long?
I didn't look that far into it, but
was it only for a day until a humble thief arrived with magic powder and made a whole army to fight them off?
No. The Mongols almost took over the entire world. They took over Baghdad in a more typical Mongol fashion, which was siege. So they sieged the city for like a week and a half until they were able to take it over in like the 13th century. There's a little history for you.
There you go. I like the movie's version better, which is that they had a secret Order 66 inside the castle. The Mongol prince then, he captures the other two princes, and he says, you shall add joy to the wedding festival by being boiled in oil. And you see they're preparing like a giant oil pit with like stirring it and stuff. And I'm like, oh, this movie can't get any better. And then Ahmed returns and summons a bunch of soldiers with his magic chest. I feel like the magic chest sort of takes the place of the genie a bit in terms of like his magic thing that sort of gets him out of jams, at least in the end.
Yeah.
Anime Wong's character has this sort of like change of heart because the Mongol prince tries to have her killed, and so then she like runs out and helps Ahmed get into the palace, which he does using his invisibility cloak when he's fighting off dudes while being invisible. And then there's he gets in and he saves the princess, and they fly through the city on the magic carpet, a whole new world. They fly past the moon like an ET.
And then it returns to some sort of special effects that went into some words that were spelled out in the sky and stars, a la the letters SFX in Lion King, or
True.
SEX depending on what you believe.
It's F, I think.
But they say happiness must be earned. This is the thing of the movie, is that he is unhappy when he's or when he's a thief and he has a goal. He can't get that goal until he puts in the legwork.
Mm-hmm.
So at the beginning and end of the movie, you're seeing the sky and it says happiness must be earned.
Another just effects thing. There's a great shot. I think this is done just purely through wires of Ahmed and the princess on the flying carpet, like flying over a crowd.
Yeah,
and it's just an incredible shot. It's so cool.
Everything to do with the magic carpet is so amazing.
Yes,
it's so good.
This movie is the fucking coolest, and I love it. But we got more films to talk about.
More movies.
We got some.
What do we do? What do we do with all this?
Well, we have 4 more. I think they fall into 2 sort of categories, right? We have our 2 sort of like high drama films and our 2 sort of like really inventive weirdo movies.
Okay. Well, let's go inventive weirdo and talk about our first Dziga Vertov movie.
Right.
Maybe his first movie?
I don't think it's actually his first movie, but first one that we're covering.
Kino-Eye, which is basically a la Man with a Movie Camera. Have you seen Man with a Movie Camera?
I have seen Man with a Movie Camera. I have not seen Kino-Eye.
Same. A la Man with a Movie Camera. It's kind of like this manifesto on what cinema can be.
Mm-hmm.
And like Man with a Movie Camera, when I saw it a decade ago, I was like, okay, this is cool, but what's the point?
I was much more impressed when I saw Man with a Movie Camera than this, which makes sense because he made it like 6 years later or whatever. Yeah. Not 6 years, like 5 years. Yeah, I mean it's an experimental film. It's like Dziga Vertov being like, hey, movies can be anything. Like they're a whole different. I do think the philosophy behind it is something I really agree with, which is that like the Kino-Eye, the cinema eye is not the human eye, and it doesn't have to abide by the same rules. So there's a lot of this movie is sort of documentary footage of just life in the countryside in the Soviet Union in 1924.
Yeah. It's a documentary, essentially, but it's a documentary where they're just kind of like messing with stuff.
Right, but it's like establishing this kind of sense of reality through the documentary stuff of like, here's people, they're going to work, they're doing, handing out flyers, getting food, whatever. Yeah. And then it breaks that through some kind of like camera trickery. So then it'll be like, hey, these people working on a farm, and then like a bunch of the footage is reversed. So we're seeing like in reverse a cow going from being meat to back to being a cow, kind of. Yeah.
There's a card that comes up that says Kino-Eye moves time backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So basically it's saying like, here are the ways that you can make cinema that does not have to be the way that reality works. And so it has a couple of these reverse segments of a cow being unslaughtered and bread being unbaked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think along with this is like it's a propaganda movie about the Soviet Union, and it's heaping all of this like praise on these young pioneers, which are this kind of like Soviet version of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, though being presented in a way as if they're like self-governing entities and with no adults around. So they're like putting up propaganda, and it's like cute and also like patriotic, but then there's also a lot of this stuff of, and I think like another thing that it's doing with this kind of like reverse process of unmaking the food is that it is showing you all of the steps of like the labor involved in making the food. Mm-hmm. Right? It's saying like, look at the butcher whose job is this, look at the farmer whose job is this, look at the look at all the steps in between, and all of like the human power that goes into the food that you eat, right? So it's like coming at this like from a worker's perspective too.
Yeah, for sure. my note on this is that watching cow getting butchered in reverse reminded me of watching Guy Fieri eating in reverse. I don't know if you're familiar with that
No.
internet phenomenon. I think it started on Conan. He did a thing of Guy Fieri eating in reverse, which is as upsetting as it sounds. But yeah, I did think that the way that it sort of would take something that is sort of very documentary style, and then trying to kind of subvert that through some kind of, it does a lot of overcranked like slow motion stuff. There's like Kino-Eye shows you how to dive properly or something like that. It's guy diving in slow motion. There's some like animation and like animated diagram stuff, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, there's like a Lottie Reiniger-esque like cutout animation at one point. There is also like at the end of each reel, there's like there's this like an animation style called pixelation, not like pixels, but like with an eye. Pixelation, that is the term for basically like using human bodies as stop motion props, and so it uses a pixelated hand drawing like end of the second reel in like a pen. It's just kind of like, and also there's this is not animation, but like another kind of formal thing that it does is this like very like modern feeling montage where they're showing the kids like building their camp that they're living in. Another kind of Kino-Eye thing of like montage, which is definitely a big Soviet thing.
There's the vodka moms dancing at the beginning.
Yeah, which it uses like a lot of like quick cutting and like extreme close-ups.
A lot more like quick, like kind of more rhythmic cutting, I think too, especially in that dancing bit. Although I will say, even though I think the editing style is much faster, I still feel like the overall pace of this movie feels very slow. To me, anyway.
It's a lot of like pastoral stuff.
Yeah.
That like there's a lot of cutting, and so it makes it feel in the moment very fast.
But it's not necessarily showing you new things very much.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're left wondering like what was the point of this edit, right? Like what was it doing? And a lot of the time it wasn't doing much.
Yeah. So Ziga hasn't quite figured out the montage editing quite yet. There's a very silly thing where it shows a shot of a street and it says the same place from a different angle, and it's the same shot like flipped sideways, and I'm like, oh, Ziga, you cheeky bugger.
See, that's the stuff. I mean, I'm excited to see Man with the Movie Camera again in context.
I think there's a lot more of that in Man with the Movie Camera, that like playful, like messing with the form kind of stuff.
Right. When I saw Man with the Movie Camera in college and they did that kind of stuff, I was just like, come on.
Right. I mean, back then it was probably very, the novelty of it, I'm sure, was a lot stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much else to say about this.
Yeah, me either.
It was it felt interesting on a kind of an academic level, but it wasn't particularly, just watching it as a film, I didn't get that much out of it, other than just like interesting seeing an earlier version of something that I think is very cool and important, in quotes, to film history, which is like the later Ziga Vertov stuff.
So one other thing that I think is formally experimental in certain ways, and is the first silent movie I ever loved, was Sherlock Jr.
I mean, it's a pretty famous one, I would say.
I saw this one in college too, but not in a class, just casually, and it became like I was like a huge advocate for this movie.
I mean, like it's very fun.
Yeah.
I really had never seen this all the way through. I'd seen the one of the several like famous scenes of the movie screen scene where he goes to the screen and then the scene is changing and it's all the best match cuts anyone has ever done.
Buster Keaton in this movie is a projectionist.
Indeed he is.
Who wants to be a detective.
Is
no,
that
no, I'm just a projectionist. But representation on screen is very important.
there? You go.
And yeah, he's reading a book. He wants to become a detective. He's reading a book called How to Be a Detective,
I mean, it seems like a good place to start.
and he falls asleep in the projection booth, which is a big no-no. Or at least while you're running a movie.
Yeah.
I've fallen asleep in a projection booth, but not while a 35mm film is running.
Like, how specifically you're qualifying that?
Look, sometimes you're in the booth until 3 a.m, and then you gotta be back at 7
Yeah.
a.m.
Hey, I
and it's
hear
an
ya.
hour drive home. Nah.
Yeah.
Anyway, he falls asleep, and so it's able to kind of break with reality,
Mhm.
and be in this kind of heightened reality, because most of the movie takes place in the dreams of a projectionist who wants to be a detective.
Mhm. Yeah.
In his dream, a kind of like, Bugs Bunny dying, like ghostly form emerges from his sleeping body, and then becomes material and walks down into the theater, and thus begins this kind of thing that, like, I was so impressed by when I saw it in college. I still think it's great.
I mean, yeah,
where-
match cuts are really hard to do, and these are like nearly flawless.
Oh yeah, not even just the match cuts though, but like the fact of him walking into the screen, right?
Yeah.
He starts off in the audience, watching the movie along with the audience, then he walks up toward the screen and then steps into it. Like there's a cut where it stops being something projected and becomes a three-dimensional stage behind the screen. And so in this very seamless way, he walks up and then walks just straight inside the movie. So good, so interesting and experimental. That was the thing that really blew my mind at the time. I think that's great. And then another kind of messing with form thing, like you were talking about, is that once he is in the movie, it kind of goes back to not being a 3D set anymore. It becomes a projection inside of the movie theater that you're still seeing wrapping around the outside. But then he starts experiencing editing as a being that is slipped out of the landscape of the movie.
It's like the scene keeps changing, but he stays in the same spot. So then it's like, oh no, like he fell off a bench because it turned into a rock, or whatever.
Yeah.
They're more fun than what I just described, but
yeah, he like is trying to like walk somewhere, and then like the scene changes, and then it's just a door, and then he runs into the door, or he's all of a sudden standing on the edge of a cliff. It leaves me wondering a little bit what happened with this movie and why it's being edited this way. It was a normal movie,
Right.
and then all of a sudden it's just a bunch of abstract shots of random places.
I mean, hey, this is his dream. It doesn't have to operate on a strict logic,
Yeah.
I am just impressed with they had to have shot, because these are all shot in different locations, some of which are one of them is up a mountain, one of them is like
In the snow.
one of them is like in the ocean, and the match cutting is like where Buster Keaton is in the frame is exactly the same between these different scenes. And I would really like to know how they just planned that. Like, did they like put a mark on the lens and just like shot everything exactly on that mark or something? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
But it is so sort of like seamless in its finished version that it's still just really impressive to watch.
And so that's like the big thing in the movie, though there are some like,
but there's so much else in it too.
Yeah,
there's all the great detectives. So then it's like his dream kind of settles into this thing where he's like solving a crime that is very similar to a crime that he has just experienced, where he's in the middle of a love triangle with this woman that her other suitor has stolen her dad's watch and pawned it, and then blamed it on Buster.
Blame it on Buster.
And so in his dream, he shows up as a detective, as Sherlock Jr. You know,
the famous detective,
the son of the famous detective. And he comes in, and it's sort of like, but it's like the house is kind of fancier. Everyone is sort of dressed in much more like wealthy clothing. And he sort of has
kind
this
of mix of like the movie that was being played in the theater with his reality.
Yeah, this sort of like chamber drama or whatever, that he then invades and becomes a detective in. And so he's like, having this aspirational dream of being a detective and solving the crime in the scene that we see, until he is eventually woken up and has to solve the crime in real life also. Well, I guess he doesn't really solve the crime in real life. It kind of resolves itself more than anything. But
he's a bumbler. He's a bit of a bumbler.
Yeah, but the way it resolves in the dream is just a bunch of great set pieces and like cool Buster Keaton gags.
Oh my god! Like, once again, there are some just ridiculous stunts in this movie.
It is the thing. At this point, I shouldn't be as like surprised by like these silent movie stunts, but they are so simultaneously precise and also just wild and insane.
Yeah. In particular, there's a point where he's like on top of like a 5-story building, and there's like one of those big arms that like comes down in front of like a train track when a train's going.
Yeah.
And there is a car that he is trying to reach that is down on ground level, and so the car starts moving, and then he like hops onto the top edge of this like folded up like train gate, and then rides it all the way down, and arcs just like perfectly down into the moving car, and he just plops into the back seat.
But the timing of the car driving has to be perfect for that to work. Like, all of it is timed out so amazingly, and it's all done in one shot. It's not cutting between anything. It's all just this one wide.
It's real. Yeah.
It is. I think we brought it up on this show before, but the Ever Frame a Painting video about Jackie Chan stunts.
Yeah.
And how much they're kind of and there's one about Buster Keaton, I think, also. And how like, if you're gonna do a cool stunt, make sure that you do the whole thing in one shot. Otherwise, it looks fake, because then even if you did it for real, right? If you have edits in it, people are gonna not think that actually you did.
They're gonna not think that your lizard dragon is real.
Yeah, exactly. So, just the like the creativity behind some of them too is so great. There's the one where he has like a woman's dress in this like round like paper thing that he puts in a window outside the sort of villain's hideout. And so he goes in, and he's like, has this whole thing in the villain's hideout.
He gets into an altercation.
Yeah, where he's like, gets the stolen jewels, and then he jumps through the window, through the paper bag, and through the dress. So then he is able to just immediately stand up and is wearing a dress, and he can kind of walk away like he's in disguise. And all the villains run out, and they're like, oh, where'd he go? Where'd he go?
There's just a random woman walking by, and he dresses himself instantly by jumping
through a window.
So good.
Incredible. And there's some amazing like motorcycle stunts in this movie. It does a great thing of like combining different methods and like effects and tricks and things like that. So there's one where he's on this like narrow bridge, and 2 trucks are driving by simultaneously, and he drives over them like perfectly as they line up in the gap in the bridge, which isn't a real stunt. He drove across straight, and it's like a split screen. So like the trucks are shot separately, but then immediately following that, there's a different shot that is done in camera where it's like the bridge starts to collapse, and he rides the collapsing bridge down into, and then keeps riding the motorcycle. It's crazy. I feel like us just describing stunts is maybe not the best podcasting, but
This is why it's tough to.
Yeah.
Well, is us describing movie plots the best podcasting?
yeah, I mean, whatever. I feel like my opinion of this movie is it's great and everyone should watch it. So
Yes, it's only 45 minutes long.
yeah,
This, I think, is like, if you want something even more approachable than Thief of Baghdad, I think this was like kind of my first silent movie as like a non-child, and I loved this so much.
Yeah.
It's really it's short, it's full of action, it's really funny, super good.
if I have one knock against it, it's that the combination of like movie theater projectionist stuff and detective stuff feels kind of slapdash. It's like, what are two
Yeah.
occupations that Buster Keaton could have in a movie? You can make a detective movie or a projectionist movie. Let's just do them at once. Like,
Yeah.
we have enough gags for like, you know, 2 reels here, 2 reels here. Let's just throw them together, you know.
Right.
But it works, and it integrates in an interesting way. It's, instead of just being like one thing, another thing. It does
Yeah.
combine the two.
This movie had a lot of laughs in it.
Yeah, it did.
And speaking of laughs,
The Last Laugh by
last laugh.
F.W. Murnau, a film that also is taking some big kind of, not necessarily formal leaps, but is pushing filmmaking forward in a lot of ways, I feel like.
For sure. I mean, honestly, I think that one of the major like theses behind this movie is a lack of title cards.
Mm-hmm.
This
Pretty much none, except for the beginning and the end.
right? Yeah. I mean, I would like to just consider this movie like basically just a movie with no title cards,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's like giving itself this really, you know, FW Murnau considered title cards to be like, not graceful.
Mm-hmm.
When making silent films,
I agree
which
with
I
him.
think was a general consensus around then that like the fewer title cards the better.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is like, let's make a movie with no title cards, more or less.
I also think, I don't know if this was necessarily the intent, but I think that as especially like German movies were getting released in other countries, in Europe or the United States or wherever, I think the lack of title cards was probably, it helped sell it in other countries, because it was like, you don't have to translate, you don't have to make new title cards for it. This thing, but there's like, this plays in a kind of universal way. It's not bound by language. And even the language that's in this movie that's built into the set is a made up language. And that's the thing that Murnau does, I know does also in Sunrise. I don't know if about language specifically, but like Sunrise doesn't really take place in Europe or the US. It's sort of this nebulous just place.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie feels the same way, where it's like, it's
I thought it was just German.
I mean, it certainly plays that way, and that's sort of how it's, but I mean, it's all shot on sets, or mostly on sets. And so
right. Well, yeah, I just mean like the text, the little bit of text that's in the movie, something like a wedding invitation or something like that.
The wedding invitation might be in German, but the like street signs and things like that are in like
gotcha.
an invented language.
Yeah, I kind of thought for a second that this movie was set in like New York City. It feels very like tenement apartments kind of thing, like juxtaposed with midtown glamour.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this might just be like a general kind of city and like residential kind of setup.
Yeah.
This movie is called The Last Laugh, but it's not very funny.
No,
it's
not a lot of laughs in this one.
It's pretty. It's actually like in some ways like the darkest movie that we talked about this, or at least like the bleakest. I think like maybe it doesn't go to as dark places, but it like it has a very bleak perspective.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is about a guy who it's like an old man who has worked at this like fancy hotel in the kind of central city area for many years, and he has been a doorman for the hotel, and he wears like a very put together doorman costume, uniform. It looks very like, just kind of military regalia, very official.
Like a fancy doorman uniform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He takes a
lot
lot
of
of pride.
A lot of buttons.
Yes, a lot of buttons. The buttons are a thing. He takes a lot of pride in his job and like the prestige that it implies, being part of this like fancy hotel, interacting with rich people, having this kind of like outfit and profession that seems very like put together, and like I'm an important person. And he lives in this kind of like economically distant thing from that reality of his workplace. As I was saying, this kind of like high-rise tenement, laundry hanging across the way, big fire escapes, that kind of thing, in this other part of town. But he's the guy in this poor part of town who like works in this rich area. He kind of like really takes pride in what he's doing. He salutes people as he's coming in. Everyone's like, this is the guy who, acts like a rich guy,
He like helps kids that are getting bullied, and he's like, hey, chin up,
He's very respected in his neighborhood.
For sure.
And then one day, his boss sees him, his kind of nosy middle manager boss sees him like enjoying a drink on the job. And he's like, this guy's slacking. I should pay more attention to what he's doing. And he also kind of sees that he's getting old, and he can't carry the packages in, or the big
suitcases,
suitcases that that the rich patrons bring into the hotel. He has to delegate it. And so his boss ends up saying, like, this thing that you've done for so long, we appreciate your service. But it turns out that the guy who was the guy in the bathroom, the old man who's in the bathroom who hands you a towel when you're done at the sink, he was just sent off to a retirement home. His life is in its twilight. His life is ending. And you're getting a little too old for this doorman thing. And so we're going to replace you. And that is... and now you're going to be one step away from... one foot in the grave, sitting in this basement bathroom, handing out towels to people. And he is crushed by this.
Yeah. So crushed that he will not tell anyone about it.
Yeah.
And tries
he's put so much of it into his personality,
Yeah. So then he, at night, he sneaks back into the hotel to steal his uniform back, so that when he returns home, he can still wear his nice, shiny doorman uniform and sort of act like he still has this very fancy job. But then he has to like put it into a locker at the train station before he goes into work every day.
And when they take this uniform off him, when he's being demoted or whatever, he is like stunned. He looks like he's in shock, basically.
And he he tries to like lift a big suitcase to show he can still do it, and he can't. Yeah, it's really sad. Yeah.
There are parts of this movie that are like maybe a little overacted, a la Orlac, but but also like you're just like seeing how like devastated this guy is, because like everything that made him respect himself is being like ripped away from him. And also like his like level of like economic power is being taken away. He's old, he can't do many jobs, and he's like poor. And another part of the movie is that he's like having to pay for a dowry for his daughter who's getting married.
Is it his daughter or is his niece?
Oh,
I don't know if it's ever quite specified, but it's something like that.
Because there's like no intertitles in this movie. Like he doesn't have a name. Nobody has a name.
Yeah.
Like there isn't any dialogue. It's all told like very gracefully, I think, through visuals, through action. So there's a lot of this back and forth. He gets super drunk, and there a lot of the visual stuff that you were mentioning is really on full display when he is getting drunk.
Yeah.
It's a lot of this kind of like subjective view of reality, where his experience of being drunk is making it's like it's showing like a double vision thing. Everything's blurry and spinning around. Like scale is getting all weird. And
there's a shot that's like from Inception in this movie of like the buildings are like folding in on top of him.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, a lot of like really, really cool effects to sell like the drunkenness, but also just like some dreams and like a lot of just like general just anguish being expressed through the visuals.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I guess is like a lot of the formal stuff that's happening here.
I mean, all throughout it though, like this movie is, I guess, somewhat known for how much it's moving the camera.
Yes.
Sort of in comparison to a lot of the other movies from this time period are pretty locked off. Like they'll pan over here and there'll be a bit of like in
sometimes there's some dolly stuff a little
sometimes
bit,
some dolly stuff. There was some in Safety Last, there was some in Greed. This movie has a lot of dolly stuff. Like a lot of dolly stuff.
I was wondering if it was like actually Steadicam or like handheld or whatever.
Some of it I'm pretty sure is handheld or at least like strapped to something. And yeah, I don't know if it was done on a dolly track. I think a lot of it is maybe on like a wheeled dolly, like going down hallways and like coming up like through doors, that sort of thing.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was kind of like, this camera's moving so far, and I should be able to see a track if there is one.
And just like the opening shot of this movie is like coming down an elevator and coming out of the elevator through the lobby of the hotel, like through the revolving doors at the front.
Yeah,
insane. I wrote down watching this movie in 1924 must have been like watching the movie Ambulance now. I don't know if you've seen the
Michael Bay movie,
Michael Bay film Ambulance from last year, which has a lot of drone cinematography in it of like the camera's literally like flying through objects and like through doors and like along the sides of buildings. It's wacky. I don't know if all of it is really earned in that movie, but it's camera stuff that has never been put up on screen really before on that scale. And that applies here, I think, in 1920s cinematography. There's a lot of stuff that I don't necessarily think has never been done before, but I think is being done really well in this and with real intent, which I think makes it stand out. There's a great bit where he, the main character, is sort of having a daydream. Which involves him, lifting a bunch of suitcases over his head, and he's just like, everyone is like adoring him. And there's a really amazing single shot where he is carrying the suitcase into the lobby of the hotel, and the footage is kind of messed up. I don't think it's supposed to look as blurry as it does. I think it seems like there's like a problem with it. At least that was my impression, because I don't see any real reason why it should be so blurry.
I think those scenes were supposed to be him still being drunk. During those, like, the drunken scenes and the dream scenes, it was, like, throwing a lot, like, each kind of scene, each kind of set piece was, like, using, like, different effects to, like, sell this kind of, like, otherworldly or, like, not real, surreal, kind of view. Like when he was drunk initially, like there's this like there's like the background is like moving like separately from him. There during the dream, there's a really striking thing with the set where they like there's this revolving door in front of the hotel, and it's like a normal revolving door, but in his dream the revolving door like goes up all the way into the sky.
It's like a 5-story tall revolving door. It's so cool.
it's like such a great image, and it's
Yeah.
like this completely like just dream logic, like it's so imposing, like the front of this building, because it means so much to him, you know.
But so he's sort of trying to, cover up the fact that he's lost his fancy job and he's now a bathroom attendant. But a woman from his building ends up seeing him in the bathroom and is horrified. It's like really seems like genuinely like horrified at what has happened to him.
Yeah.
Which I have to wonder is like, is that actually her reaction, or is that almost like his perception of her reaction? Because it seems so outsized to me. But so then she goes back to the building, and it's, the gossip spreads quickly through all the old biddies at the apartment, who are all like laughing at him behind his back.
And then all of a sudden the entire town doesn't respect him anymore.
Pretty much, yeah. There's some really great cinematography stuff in here too, where like we see like the gossip like spreading through the apartment complex. Yeah. And there's some like whip pans almost. There's a couple really great sort of like really quick like dolly-in moves on like someone's ear as they're listening.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
Stuff that reminded me of like Scorsese or Paul Thomas Anderson, the way that they like, they like sort of, doing like whip the camera around, like really quickly dolly in on stuff. Like that kind of really energetic camera movement is something that I really don't associate with this time period of filmmaking at all.
This and Kino-Eye definitely have some wild movement.
He goes back to the hotel to give his uniform back. He like
there's no need to hold on to it and keep the illusion up anymore.
Yeah, like you get the sense that like his daughter like doesn't really like want to be associated with him anymore. Like,
so yeah, I mean I believe the woman who sees him, or at least one of the women who finds out, is the mother of his daughter or niece's like fiance. And so this person is like, you work in a bathroom, so you can't afford a dowry anymore. We don't respect you. We're gonna laugh at you, and also you should just like go away, basically. Yeah. Like all these people are just ridiculously cruel to him.
Yeah. So he gets like shamed out of his home, basically.
Yeah.
And he just kind of returns to the bathroom, and that's where we get our like one of our two intertitles, right? There's like one at the beginning kind of setting it up, and then this other one where it's like, this is where the story should end. Like,
at this point, like he's spending so much time just like stunned and like hurt, you know, like he's like insulted and like thinking about how everyone like no one respects him anymore, how he's going to die poor, and he's like he's got one foot in the grave. Like the bathroom attendant is the last thing you do before you just
that's like,
rot
that's
away,
like code
basically.
For like you're about to die, is you become the bathroom attendant.
Yeah. And so like he spends a lot of this movie just like staring off into space, just like being upset, and so it ends with him just this like wide shot of the bathroom and him just like sitting in this chair like right in the center of the frame, just like depressed.
Yeah.
And that's when the title card comes on, and it's like, for him and many other people who are in his situation, this is how the story goes.
Yeah.
He would die. He would just do this until he's dead.
Yeah. I want to bring up just Emil Jannings is the actor who plays the doorman. And he's very good in this movie.
It's a very sad Santa Claus.
But so then the title card after that is like, yeah, this is really the end of the story. This is what happens to people. And then it's like, but the writer has taken pity on this man, and we're gonna have a little epilogue.
This is dumb. I think this is bad.
Yeah.
I think that I think that this epilogue tarnishes the movie.
It's funny though, because it is this like tacked on like superficial happy ending, but it's so upfront about it. It's so like, this is bullshit. Like this isn't reality. This isn't how things actually happen. But we're gonna show it to you anyway because like, sure, why not?
it feels like it's made by a different person. It feels like it was almost like they felt like they needed to add it on. Everything in this movie felt like it's going to be a tragedy. It's going to have a bad ending, you know? And like, I don't know whether or not this was like intended from the very beginning, but it really doesn't feel like it. Like, they're literally doing like the Wayne's World, like, let's do a super happy ending now, and you know?
But it's like, it's that kind of like meta almost in how it's approaching it. It's like, oh yeah, this is like this is supposed to feel out of place. Like, I don't know, it still felt like there was real intent behind it for me anyway.
Yeah.
In that, I also just think it's a really it's still the craft behind it is still really good. So like, just the reveal of him. So like, after we show that, we had like a newspaper showing that like, oh, some rich guy died in the bathroom and left his fortune to the first person who found him. It was the bathroom attendant. And we're sort of, there's a shot sort of like moving all through the restaurant, which is also great. Moving all throughout the restaurant, all these massive, you know, dishes and things, all these fancy people, and we finally come to a giant like thing of shrimp cocktail or something. And they lift it up and they reveal our main character, who's now like in a tuxedo with a big napkin, and he's like eating all this food and caviar, and he's like, you know, bringing the other you know, the night watchman
nice to him.
The night watchman who was nice to him brings him over, and he's like, hey, anything you want here, just have as much food as you need. And then it's like, they're like, oh, anything. The middle manager comes out and he's like, excuse me, can I get you anything? And it's, you know, he's laughing all the way to the bank, and he's living it up, and he's just like throwing money away to people. There's like a beggar comes up to him outside the hotel, and he's like, you know what? Ride in my carriage. I'm going to take you anywhere you want to go.
The crucial thing about all of this is that like, he is unlike the other rich people previously in the movie, he is being like respectful and to the service staff around him. He understands their position, so he's just like super nice to them, giving them money, whatever, you know. I'm a millionaire, so I'm gonna like treat waiters right, basically.
So yeah, this movie was written by Carl Meyer, who also wrote or co-wrote Caligari. I feel like the kind of weird ending feels a little in line with that too. I know that might not have been his intent with Caligari, but yeah, I don't know. I think I liked the weird ending more than you did, but it does feel super out of place. But I don't know. It worked for me.
Yeah, I watched this movie with Jack Vernick, who was on our Irma episode, and he hadn't seen the movie in a couple years, and when we got to the end, he was like, oh my god, I forgot about this part. Yeah. I was telling you I love the movie, but I think I just blocked this ending from my mind.
To bring up Scorsese again, it also reminded me of Taxi Driver a bit, which also has this like weirdly out of place happy ending at the end. That is like, where did this come from? And it feels almost the same way, where there's something kind of what's the word I'm thinking of? Subversive about telling this super dark, bleak as hell story, and then having this sort of like surreal happy ending at the end of it, where it's sort of like, this isn't actually how the story should end, but we're going to show it to you as sort of this. Yeah, I don't know. There's something about it that is compelling, I think. So in reading about this, I think there's some interesting behind the scenes stuff. I mean, I think the whole main theme of this movie, like economic anxiety, feels very topical for 20s Germany. And then I found a quote by a French-German film critic from the 20s, who talked about how sort of like uniforms were a much bigger deal in German culture. And so Lotte Eisner, this critic, said this film is preeminently a German tragedy and can only be understood in a country where uniform is king, not to say God. A non-German mind will have difficulty in comprehending all its tragic implications. And I definitely got that, like, his uniform is a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
if only to him as a character. Like, this character cares so deeply about his uniform and what it represents. But knowing that that's even more of a, like, cultural thing in Germany, I think especially in Germany in the 20s, it does add another kind of layer to it.
I think also, I was mentioning how the breadth of subject matter with, or at least narrative style with silent films, having piece of shit protagonists like in Greed. This is a movie that is just such a specific plot, right? Like, it's hard to imagine anything like this getting made nowadays. Like, a guy is a doorman and then he becomes a restroom attendant and he's sad about it. like this is something that I feel like the specificity of it is really unique.
Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot.
It is, because it is kind of so of its time. Yeah, it does feel like something, just wouldn't exist now in a really, in a cool way, I think. Gotta shout out Karl Freund, who was the director of photography on this movie. He also later shot Metropolis for Fritz Lang and the 1931 Dracula. He also directed the original Boris Karloff The Mummy, which is pretty cool. Haven't seen that still.
I guess we'll be getting to it this year.
Eventually. He was also the director of photography on I Love Lucy, and kind of helped. He kind of helped define the entire, like, visual style of sitcoms.
Whoa! Wow.
So, like, this guy is just crushing it left and right in terms of, like, laying the groundwork for cinematography. Really impressive. But shall we move on? Film about living in a society. I mean, that is what both these movies are about, basically, right?
Yes. This movie is the original, the OG, I'm going to become the Joker movie.
Well, yeah, pretty much. It predates even the movie that the Joker is based on.
Yes. But yeah, it's very Joker-esque.
Well, it's about a guy who kind of, his life goes to shit and he becomes a clown and then he does murder. So yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Those are light murders.
Well,
anyway.
they're much more exciting, cool murders because they involve lions. So
yes, we're getting ahead of ourselves. This is He Who Gets Slapped.
Great title.
Great title. Again, you couldn't make a title like that now. That's
probably
it's
not
a whole sentence.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. There are occasionally movies that have weird long titles like that.
This movie is so cool.
It is very cool, very wild. It is a weird movie.
Yes.
I was a fan though.
I think this movie is it is it I think it's The Last Laugh is playing with some, like, themes, right? Of like class. Greed's playing with some very on the nose themes. I think this movie, it, like, gives you stuff to chew on, you know?
Yes. It is not a movie that gives you easy answers, which is, I think, very unlike most of the silent films that we've watched. Tend to be fairly clear-cut in what morals they're kind of putting forward. Whereas this movie's just like, hey man, world's crazy, am I right?
Yeah, which is ridiculous because, like, this is directed by Victor Sjöström, who has now started making movies in Hollywood and has Americanized his last name as Victor Seastrom.
Indeed. When I saw that in the opening credits, I was like, oh boy. It's like, that's something people did back in the day, is like they would anglicize their names. I guess people still do that. But we've watched all of his proper movies, right? His Scandinavian films where he's credited as Sjöström. And then it's like, Victor Seastrom presents He Who Gets Slapped. And it's like He's gone Hollywood, man.
But I thought that, his last movie that we talked about on the podcast,
Right.
The Phantom Carriage, I hated that movie.
Yeah, not one of his
because
better films, I didn't think.
but specifically because it had these like stupidly like
very
more like simple morals, right?
very moralistic, very preachy, very clear cut in what it's trying to put forward.
And this one, like, it's so complex.
Mhm.
There's I think there's just so much going on with this movie, but let's talk about what's going on in it.
Yeah.
So this is our first Lon Chaney movie that we talked about.
True. Yeah. I mean, I also watched his Hunchback of Notre Dame film from the previous year, but we didn't have time to talk about it. Lon Chaney is good at his job. Reason why that dude was so famous.
Lon Chaney is great in this movie. Really, really good acting.
And this is a much less showy role, I think, than Quasimodo in Hunchback. It's less of a kind of like transformative makeup thing.
Which he's famous for.
Right. Back in the 1920s, actors did their own makeup. There wasn't a dedicated makeup department. And so Lon Chaney was the guy making all these like wild prosthetics and like monster makeup and things like that. He kind of was a pioneer in that field. And this in this he plays a sad clown, so it's less transformative, but it's still, I think a lot of what he's doing as an actor here is in line with, I think, what he's known for.
Right. So this is Lon Chaney is playing a scientist who who's been working on these like really in-depth things. He's been working on it for years, and he has this benefactor, this rich benefactor who has been funding his research. A baron, Baron Regnard, who has been funding his research, and after years or whatever, he finally makes a breakthrough.
Yeah. We never really find out what his breakthrough is, right? Like, it's pretty nebulous. Like, he's a scientist. He made a breakthrough.
Yeah, it's not germane, I guess, but he goes to his wife and he's like, "Oh my God, I've finally figured it out. I've finally done this. I'm going to become a rich and famous scientist." And he says to the Baron, like, "Thank you so much for funding me all of this time. I appreciate like everything that you've done for me." And he's like, Of course. And so Paul, who Lon Chaney plays, goes up to this Academy of Scientists, and he's like, "I'm going to present my finding." And he is introduced by the Baron, and in that introduction, the Baron just spills all the beans and
fully takes credit for his discovery.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show, never trust a guy who goes by the title The Baron.
And so Lon Chaney's character, he's like, what's going on here, like you're gonna say that this was my idea, right? He goes up to the Baron and says, like, please like tell them the truth, tell them that this was mine, and that you just said it in front of them. And the Baron says, "You're just some lab assistant. I don't like, you didn't come up with any of this. Like, I don't respect you. You're not real." And the scientists are all like, "Oh my god." And then a formative moment happens in his life, which is the Baron, after all of this pleading, the Baron is trying to like dismiss him to make himself feel superior, and he slaps Paul. And then when he slaps him, all of the scientists laugh at him.
Yeah, they're like the Academy of Old Dudes that he's been presenting to.
The non-wizard hatted scientists.
Yeah.
They all laugh at him, and he's crushed. Not unlike Last Laugh guy, Doorman.
So then he returns home to his wife. Are they married? I don't think they're actually.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so he returns home to his wife, and he tells her the news of what happened today, and she's like weirdly distant about it. And then the Baron walks in, and it turns out that she has been with the Baron this entire time, and she doesn't care that her husband was laughed at and made a fool of and disgraced.
Yeah.
Because she's with the Baron now.
She says, "You with your silly face and stupid books," and then she laughs at him and calls him a clown.
And that's when his mind fully breaks.
Yeah.
You
can see the moment where his heart breaks in half. and then the Baron says, "Who is the most popular now, Paul?"
Ooh, that's 2 references in 10 seconds. Nice. Oh yeah, Paul, that works. Okay. So then we flash forward, and he has
he's done what anyone would do in this situation. He's joined the circus.
Yes. And he has done this sort of like reclaiming of this moment where he was slapped and made a fool of by becoming this clown who is known as He
who gets slapped.
He now is a very popular clown in this circus, and he does all of these routines where he is like summoning the power of how funny it is to get slapped in the face, and just gets slapped 60 times per show. And they're all like, got slapped 60 times this time. That was a good show tonight, Paul.
And it's such a popular show that the circus has kind of built their entire sort of image around. Like he's there's a neon sign of him getting slapped in the face.
Yes.
So he's like the star attraction of this circus, is a clown who gets slapped a bunch.
He's a good clown.
Yeah.
And Lon Chaney is really good in normal guy mode and in clown mode.
Yeah.
He plays a great clown. But yeah, this guy literally becomes the Joker. He does the meme.
And then at the circus, we're introduced to 2 of our other really central characters, Bizano and Consuelo, who are the sort of young, hot, romantic leads of this film. Bizano is a sort of horseback stunt rider, and Consuelo is the daughter of this sort of wealthy
the Count.
Yes, the Count, of course, because we had the Baron and now we have the Count, our 2 villains.
Yeah.
And so Bizano and Consuelo kind of get thrown together as part of the circus act with the horse. There's a funny bit where the horse is actually pushing Bizano into the room to like go talk to her.
Yeah.
Some of the intertitles in this are kind of, they're a little maybe overwritten, but they're kind of fun. They describe the Count as the flower of an old family gone to seed, and then Consuelo as an orchid in the ruined Mancini gardens.
Yeah, I was trying to understand what those really meant.
I think I get the intent from them. It's like, one is this like, head of a wealthy family, but who is, not a very good person, and the other is this sort of like this one bright spot in this sort of like ruinous old money family. And we get a bunch of circus stuff. Some circus acts and things.
I forgot to mention earlier, actually, one kind of like other interesting wrinkle about like him get his act of getting slapped on stage is that he is pretending to present his scientific findings to the academy, an academy of clowns. They all laugh at him, and as they laugh at him, they slap him. Every time he tries to say something, he gets slapped.
And
So it's this like degradation, like humiliation thing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Um it also, his act ends with, he has got this little plush heart that gets sewn into his
Oh yes.
costume, and at the end of the act it is ripped out and then buried.
Yeah, stomped on the ground and
Yeah.
then buried. Super sad clown.
Yeah.
And yeah, great stuff to work with.
Men will literally become a clown and turn their worst experience into a circus show instead of going to therapy.
The circus is his therapy, Glenn.
It's true.
But he hasn't healed that much because one day the Baron comes to see a show, and after the show, and like he notices the Baron,
throws him off his rhythm.
Yeah, and eventually the Baron goes backstage, and the Baron ends up kind of trying to court Consuelo as a lover of some kind, despite he's ex-wife being with him as well.
Indeed. It is also around here, right? So the Count has sort of talked to Consuelo that he has this rich friend who wants to marry Consuelo, who turns out to be the Baron.
Right.
We get a reveal that the Count has a sword cane, which is going to come into, it's going to be important later.
Chekhov's sword cane.
Exactly. Bisano, the horse guy, and Consuelo go out for a lovely picnic in the garden and make flower crowns. Meanwhile, like, the Count is kind of trying to marry her off to the Baron. Like, you have money, my family doesn't really have money anymore. Let's make this work. I don't care what my daughter wants.
Yeah.
But so Consuelo is still like, she won't agree to marry Bisano because she's like, I need my father's, approval, which is, a bunch of bullshit. But Consuelo is old fashioned.
But yeah, there's a lot of this like development of the relationship between the two of them. Like they really seem, it's like they're the couple. They are the ones who, deserve the love or whatever. Right.
But then also, meanwhile, Paul, or he, is also kind of falling for Consuelo because Consuelo is nice to him and will like talk to him backstage. She like sews the heart into his costume before the show, and just kind of treats him like a human being.
Honestly, like, I was when this reveal happened that there was a triangle and that he loved Consuelo too. I was a little like disappointed in the movie.
I got a little worried about how it was going to play out, and then my worries were put aside because it handles it very well, I think. So
he admits to Consuelo that he loves her.
Yeah.
And then she laughs at him.
She immediately laughs it off like, oh, I thought you were serious. Like, she immediately thinks it's like part of his like sad sack persona.
Like, yeah.
Of like, I've loved you secretly from afar. And she's like, oh, you.
Which is, it's true, but then like it's true that he loves her, but then he knows this situation, right? Even though he has just like admitted that he loves her, he's like, well, another embarrassment that I can reclaim, know? And so he goes, yes, you're right. That was the joke all the time. That I was just goofing around and I'm just playing a character,
Yeah. He kind of uses that to fuel, uses that as fuel back into like the persona that he's built.
Yeah, and it's like this combination of just like masochism and and like reclaiming of like the things that hurt him, and like a shield at the same time.
Yeah.
Like there's so much that's going on with this character, and I think like Lon Chaney does like a fantastic job of
he's
like,
also
it all.
taking the most painful thing he's ever lived through and he's turning it into art. Like he's you know. But so then Paul confronts the Baron and the Count about their sinister plans to marry Consuelo to the Baron. He's like, I'm not losing another one to you, Baron. And they sort of have an altercation, and the Count stabs him with his sword cane. But clever Paul has left a trap, which is that he has left a lion cage open outside the door. Like, he put a lion cage like right up against the door and like opened the front of it. So then he's there like bleeding out from a stab wound. And the Count and the Baron are like, ha ha ha, we stabbed this guy, let's leave.
Yeah.
And they open the door.
During this altercation, by the way, like he reveals himself to be Paul to the Baron.
Yeah.
And he's like, and so the Baron is like, oh God, like this guy has got some kind of revenge going on right now.
So they try to leave, but they open the door and there's a lion there. And so there's a great scene where they're just like getting attacked and mauled by a lion. They don't show anything gruesome, but it's still like it's a real lion. Yeah. And there's this bit where they're trying to like hide behind tables, and then it will show just the lion leaping over the table and like stuff getting like commotion happening.
And so the lion eventually kills them.
Mm-hmm.
And he is just left in the room, stabbed, and ready to be lion food. And he says the best line in the movie. The lion's coming up to him, and he says, "It's time for the final slap." Oh God! That's
this
a
movie,
paraphrase.
This is the movie that slaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah.
But so then the lion tamer shows up and chases the lion away before the lion can slap him to death with its claws.
And teeth.
And Paul goes out to perform his act, right? His slap act.
While dying.
While bleeding out, yeah. Which he does, and he finishes the act, but dies holding his like plush heart that has been in his costume. So it's soaked through with blood.
Oh man.
And sort of Bazzano and Consuelo are finally free to, be together because the machinations of the Count and the Baron are mute because they've both been killed by a lion. And the movie ends with the quote, "What is death? What is life? What is love?"
That's kind of silly, but
it's still kind of silly. But it's I think in fitting with the kind of operatic nature of this whole movie.
Very operatic.
Yeah, it's based on a Russian play. I'm not sure if it's an opera or just I think it's just a play. I don't think it's an actual opera, but that tracks to me. Like, yeah, this feels like a Russian play. It's very bleak. We mentioned like anti-heroes before, and I think Paul kind of fits into that more so than like McTeague. Like McTeague is just a bastard. Whereas Paul is like, we do care about him and like what happens to him in the story, but he's also like a crazy person. And like he doesn't really do good things necessarily. Like he does
a lot of empathy.
Murder via lion, which rules, but is also, not the most morally upstanding act.
I don't know. I feel like when you're in a movie, when you're watching a movie, when you're a character in a movie, like you have a little more leeway as far as like killing people.
Sure, yeah.
Especially if it's by lion.
But I feel like Paul embodies that kind of archetype more so than most other characters that we've come across.
Yeah, he's a tragic tragic anti-hero.
But he like I don't know, like I feel like the thing, I like how he is sort of like thinks he's having this sort of romantic relationship with Consuelo, and it's like, no, like that's entirely one-sided, and she immediately dismisses it, and he's just
and he immediately like reclaims it, as
Right,
as part of his thing. And eventually, like, the romantic subplot with him and Consuelo is like completely dropped,
right,
because he has just internalized the masochism,
mm-hmm.
and but also, he's like, you're free to live your life now,
Yeah.
He
Well,
is like not trying to like use his death to like get to her. He's given up on trying to get to her.
I mean, and the main reason, other than revenge, he is trying to kill the Baron and the Count in order to like give her a future, sort of like they're the people that are preventing her from being happy, and so he's like, I'm just gonna kill them with a lion, and then you're good.
He is getting his own revenge, but he's also living his life in service of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And like when his life gets ruined by the scientists, he decides to take his shame and like use it for the entertainment of other people. He's like this he's a true benefactor of all the people around him.
Yeah.
He's a good dude. Even if he killed some people with a lion, they sucked anyway.
Yeah, sure. There was a Letterboxd review of this movie that described it as having a threatening aura, which I very much agree with. I think that is an apt description of this movie. Because there is something that is like, this movie isn't more violent or more gruesome than anything we've watched, but it is like, there's something about it that is very like, threatening. It is, like you said, there are other movies that get into darker subject matter and have like darker things occurring on screen, but I think this movie as just this this tone and this vibe to it that is very like, ooh, this is, I'm not used to seeing this.
Yeah. Got anything else on that?
I don't know, I guess it's like the way that it's not really satire, but it's treating it seriously, but there's this kind of like almost kind of like sarcastic quality to a lot of, at least with the main character, like the way that he kind of laughs stuff off and is, he's like, the whole
tone of
it's
this
all a
movie is
big
really
joke.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty it's a good film. It feels pretty daring for this year.
Yeah. And despite the fact that like I feel like a lot of these ideas have been kind of hijacked by chuds, if this movie came out now, it would embolden the wrong kind of people.
People who want to join the circus and do murder.
I mean, joining the circus, go for it. I'm just talking about
more incels should join the circus, is what you're saying.
Yes, actually.
Hell, they'll probably get laid in the circus, right?
I'm sure you know how circus people are. I'm sure you're aware of how circus people are. This movie is like, I think it's like so like thematically rich. It's like very like narrow. It's like playing with these ideas, like this narrow set of ideas, but it is examining them through all of these like really interesting lenses. It's like putting them through different tests. I think that like I haven't seen Joker. I haven't seen the stupid Joker movie.
Spoilers, this movie is better.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, I feel like the sense that I get from the Joaquin Phoenix Joker movie is that, or just the Joker Batman story in general, is that it's playing with similar themes, but it's doing it in a less interesting way. I think this movie is awesome. I think it's really smart. I think it's one of the smartest movies that we've seen so far.
Well, I think you said this before. It asks a lot of the audience in ways that not a lot of other movies, or that at least we've watched up to this point for the show, have done.
Yeah.
Which I like. It makes it stick out for sure. Speaking of lions, though, a little fun fact at the end here about this movie is it is the first appearance of the MGM lion logo.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So Goldwyn Pictures already had a lion logo. So they already had this sort of like film strip lion thing. But this was the first, it wasn't the first MGM film release, but it was the first film produced by the newly formed MGM studio.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the first one to have the lion with the actual MGM logo on it, even if Goldwyn already had the lion logo. It just had a different name on it. So that's just a fun thing.
Yeah, and this was one of the top grossing movies of the year too.
Yeah.
Which I think for like, I don't know, an art film, I don't know if for a really challenging drama that has like some really interesting tonal stuff going on. Like that's pretty impressive that this got such play, you know.
Yeah. Well, I feel like big melodramas tended to play well in the 1920s. It seems like that was very in style at the time.
Fair enough. I mean, I think that this is like elevated beyond a lot of melodramas. But we can move on to favorites of the year.
Ooh. I mean, I think I know what mine is.
I think I know what yours is too. When I first saw He Who Gets Slapped, and I want to watch it again like very soon, but when I first saw it, I was like, okay, instant favorite. Like this movie is so good. It's like really complex. It's like really interesting. It's funny. It's awesome. I think that, and I love He Who Gets Slapped, but I think that Thief of Bagdad just has way too much going for it for me to not pick it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little on the fence because I also really like Sherlock Jr. I think that movie is fantastic. But yeah, Thief of Baghdad, I was just like, I had a dumb grin on my face pretty much the entire time. I was just so full of glee watching that movie. I was just yes! I was like vibrating with enthusiasm watching it. It's very up my alley too. There's a lot of monster fights. There's treasure hunts. There's like magic and all this stuff. Yeah, it's great. Thief of Baghdad is the best.
The best of 1924. You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Double endorsed.
Yeah.
And so that'll do it for this year. And that'll do it for this episode as well, because we do one episode for every year.
It is very late. We need to wrap this up.
So if you're interested in following us online, you can do that on Instagram and Twitter. And you can email us if you want. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. 1 week, 1 year podcast @gmail.com, right?
Spelled out. ONE.
Yeah.
It's not consistent anywhere. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching, everybody on YouTube. And Glenn, I will see you next year.
See you next year.